Good evening and welcome to the Stearns County Board of Adjustment public hearing for Thursday, April 11th, 2024. We'd like to recite the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Just going to call a roll call for members. Dan?
Present.
Bonnie? Here. Jason?
Here.
Rob?
Here.
Amy? Here. George? Here. And I'm Jill, and we're all here. I have a couple of announcements to make. If you are in possession of a cell phone or some other type of electronic paging device, I ask that you put it on a silent mode at this time. Also, please note that all testimony is being recorded for the record. If you're going to speak, you'll be asked to state your name and address for the record first, and then go ahead with your input after you've been recognized by the chair. Members of the Board of Adjustment are appointed by the County Board of Commissioners, with one member from each of the 5 commissioner districts, one member at large, and one member appointed from the Planning Commission. I'm going to give a brief overview of our proceedings this evening. I will read the variance request and open the public hearing. While I'm reading your request, I would ask that the applicant come forward and have a seat in front of the board by the microphone. The applicant will be asked to state their name and address for the record. Environmental Services staff will provide a brief overview of the requested variance, the staff report, and if any correspondence has been received regarding the request. The applicant will then provide any input, corrections, concerns, comments, etc. Once the applicant has provided their testimony, the board will discuss the request and ask questions of staff or the applicant. Upon completion of board questions, I will ask if there is anyone in the audience wishing to speak to this request. If there is, I would ask that person to come up to the podium, state their name and address for the record, and give their testimony. When all testimony is complete, I will ask the board members for a motion to close the public hearing. Once the motion is passed to close the public hearing, there will be no further input from the audience, from the applicant, or Environmental Services staff, unless recognized by the chair, or if one of the board members wants some type of clarification. The board will review and discuss the findings of fact. The findings are a series of questions that the board is required to answer based on Minnesota statute and the requirements of the ordinance. Based upon the answers to those questions, the board will either grant or deny the variance request. All questions must be answered in the affirmative by the board. Once the findings are complete, there will be a motion to approve or deny the request based upon those findings. Okay. Our first agenda item. A request from Paul and Deanna Hiltner, Melrose, Minnesota, from section 6.58.2 B and H of Stearns County Land Use and Zoning Ordinance 439 to construct a 42-foot by 70-foot residential dwelling, less than 200 feet from an existing dwelling, as a secondary single-family residential dwelling unit accessory to an agricultural operation. Said ordinance requires a secondary single-family residential dwelling unit shall be located a minimum of 200 feet from the existing residential dwelling unit on the property, and that the property must be able to be legally subdivided to create one lot for the primary dwelling and a separate lot for the secondary dwelling. Affected property, 80 acres in the east half of the northeast quarter, section 36, township 126, range 033, Melrose Township. Property address 38823, County Road 168, Melrose, Minnesota, 56352. So applicants, if you can make sure the little green light's on, and then let us know your name and address for the record, please.
I'm Paul Heltner, 38823 25 County Road 168, Melrose, Min, 56352.
Dina Hiltner, 38825 County Road 168, Melrose, Minnesota.
Thank you. I'd like to do a roll call if members were able to visit the site. Dan?
Yes, and I met with Mr. Hiltner yesterday morning. So,
Okay. Anything that you were discussing we want to put on the record?
Just that the existence, that it doesn't show noted here that there is a gas line going through the field to the north of that that's not listed on the property. And there is actually a right of way for that we should consider too. So otherwise, everything else is pretty much as stated.
Thank you. Bonnie?
Yes.
Jason?
Yes.
I was not able to visit the site. Rob?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
George?
No.
Okay, thank you. For staff?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Some background. The applicants own 80 acres in Melrose Township. The property is in the A40 zoning district, and they purchased the property in 2019. There is an existing 824 square foot residential dwelling that was constructed in 1951. There is also a 1,280 square foot manufactured home that was placed on the property in 1994. The septic system that serves the existing mobile home was installed in 1992 and certified compliant in March of this year. The applicants are proposing to remove the existing mobile home and replace it with a 70-foot by 42-foot, 2,940 square foot, two-bedroom patio home and attached garage. The proposed dwelling will be within the Shoreland Overlay District of an unnamed natural environment lake. The existing septic serving the manufactured home is sized appropriately to match the proposed dwelling. The proposed request represents a 65.5% deviation from the required 200-foot setback standard. Since 2015, there have been 29 provisional use registrations for accessory dwelling units, temporary and secondary single-family residential dwelling units that did not require a variance. Included with the staff report that you have with you, the Planning Commission meeting minutes from June 20 of 2013, where second home standards were discussed that eventually led to the ordinance as it's written. Melrose Township, Sauk River Watershed District, the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, and property owners within 500 feet have been notified of this request. Some alternatives and recommended conditions that are of note for this request. Number one, to grant or deny the variance request based on the findings of fact. Number two, replace the existing manufactured home with another manufactured home as temporary secondary single-family residential dwelling unit. This alternative is limited to a manufactured home that shall be no less than 14 feet in width, connected to an approved septic for a maximum of 15 years as a provisional use. Another alternative would be to replace the existing manufactured home with the proposed dwelling and label the 824 square foot residential dwelling as the temporary secondary single-family residential dwelling unit. This alternative would require a variance from the standard that the existing dwelling be converted into the temporary secondary single-family residential dwelling unit. Needs to be at least 80 years old. The current 824 square foot dwelling is 73 years old. It would also have to be removed or converted into an accessory structure not for human habitation after 15 years when the provisional use registration expires. Another alternative would be to replace the existing manufactured home with a detached accessory dwelling unit. This alternative requires that the accessory dwelling unit be placed within 150 feet of the principal dwelling and is limited to a maximum of 1,000 square feet gross floor area, including an attached garage. A fifth alternative would be to remove the existing manufactured home and place the new proposed dwelling in an area on the farmstead that meets the standard of a secondary single-family residential dwelling unit. This alternative requires a distance of 200 feet between dwellings and that the secondary dwelling be placed in a manner that the property is able to be legally subdivided to create a separate lot for the secondary dwelling upon expiration of the provisional use registration in 30 years. That is all I have.
Thank you. Do the applicants have anything they'd like to say on the record for this request?
The only thing this is Paul. The only thing I have to say is, my sister lives in the farmhouse, and she's lived there over her whole life. My parents used to live in there too, but they both passed, so now she lives in there. And according to what I understood, relatives can live in the house. So that was my main thing. I just don't want to kick her off and tell her she can't live there anymore.
Okay, anything else the applicant would like to state?
No.
All right, any questions from board members?
I have a question for applicant. Dan, you said there was a gas line. Can you show us on the picture where that is? And are there any buried electrical wires, any tile lines that are running through the property?
No tile. There is, REA has a line buried right along the road. There's a post out here somewhere. And it runs down and it runs around and it goes to I think it's right over here. That's all buried underground. And the gas line come out from the barn here somewhere. There's a yellow post right here. It would run this way to over here by these bags, and then it runs this way over pretty much straight to the creek.
Thank you.
And then I have a question for the applicant. The building that's across the driveway, that blue building, what is that? It almost looked like a small residence, but is it an office or?
That was the addition that we had on the trailer originally. So when we sell the trailer, we needed to move that off. So we're getting prepared to sell the trailer. So it's moved, and right now it's temporarily storing our furniture and stuff until we decide. He wants to make it to a workshop, but that's not decided. So
Okay.
that got temporarily moved to put the furniture.
But it won't be any type of a residence?
Oh, no.
Okay, just,
He wants to make it a workshop.
Jason Beeman, question for the applicant. So your sister is living in the farmhouse. At such time as the farmhouse becomes vacant, do you have any plans for it?
As of right now, no. I she's, what would she be? She's 63. So, my family, if nothing happens, we were on into our 80s before we passed. So I mean, that would be, at that time, it would probably get tore down.
So follow-up question for staff. So if we make the farmhouse the secondary dwelling and then have a provisional use assigned to it, can we extend that after 15 years?
Madam Chair, Member Wienerman, the extensions on the provisional use as the ordinance changes, we're just now coming into our first round of these interim use permits that we were at one point issuing for these types of structures. And we're finding that a lot of them have either taken care of themselves over the years or, they're reapplying for a provisional use because there's a new method by which they could be permitted. So it's not out of the question if it's something that's short term, or if there's, at that time they could potentially come in and request to have that extended. We'd have to look at what the process would be there, but it may be possible depending on what the ordinance reads. This ordinance is changing, and even with the interim use permit, we haven't seen many of them come back around.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question for staff. Alternative number 4 says to replace the existing manufactured home with a detached ADU, where an ADU is limited to a maximum of 1,000 square feet, where the existing 73-year-old home is within that 1,000 square feet. Is it possible that they could build the patio home, which is more than 1,000, and name the original home as the ADU, thus fitting into those requirements?
Yeah, Madam Chair, it's funny you bring that up. We actually thought about this at the staff report review because that was the question I raised. I said, wait a minute, this is under that. But it has a second story, and that cumulative floor area of the structure is what counts towards the ADU, so it would be over the 1,000 square foot.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, we did talk about it.
I have a question for applicants. What is the reason why you can't abide by the distance and build you have 80 acres of land? Why can't you build it to abide by the distance?
Well, I still got cattle, so I want to stay close to where I am, and the problem is if I build somewhere else, I got to worry about the gas line,
Sauk River.
Sauk River, and I got that lake on the other side of the road, and I got hills that go, Dan could tell you, I got some hills, sand hills that you can't build on. And I don't want to ruin any of my good land. I just as soon keep the land that I got and put it back where it is. That would work good for me.
Well, that the lower left corner that gets flooded from the river. Yeah, then you got the feedlot on the upper left corner, the upper right corner. That's where the gas line is. That's our only tillable land on that 80 acres. And then, then you got the building sites.
Where's the well on that property, and do you guys each have a single one, or do you share it?
It's shared well.
It's a shared
It's
well.
in between the.
It is 10 feet from the farmhouse.
Can you show it?
Oh, sure.
And it should show on the septic.
It should be right in this here back corner. And it runs from there to our house.
And it runs up to the other house too.
Yeah, well, it runs into this one, and then it runs from this one, it runs into.
Okay, so the barn and that, where does the water come from that one?
It also comes out of the house. And then it runs, but I just put a line up to my shed. So I have a line that runs from my house to the shed, and the line that runs from the house to the barn.
Okay.
They're both buried,
Can you go to the other map, please? The one with the purple line and the green line? Yes, this one. So I was not able to visit the site. So is the house in the center of that purple circle, that's the 73-year-old home,
Yes.
and the building directly to the right of it is the manufactured home that you're looking to replace?
Yes.
Okay.
Question for the applicant. So I'm going to assume that you've read the 5 alternatives provided by staff, so the 5 potential conditions. Are there any of those that are non-starters for you? So I assume number 1 is kind of what we're looking for, but if we look at 2, 3, 4, and 5, are there any of those that, should we approve those, will make this project not work?
2, 3.
Well, we'd really rather not replace it with another mobile home.
Okay.
We've, for years, put hay bales around the house just to keep it warm in the winter.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. So 2 would be difficult.
It would be possible, but it wouldn't be preferable.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I have a question for applicants. Back to that map. You said that the gas line comes into the barn,
No,
No,
to the shed?
the gas line, no, it runs kind of right straight from the barn, kitty corner to the road.
Paul,
It-
can you
Okay,
show us
so it's
again?
under,
The gas
yeah.
line here, and then it'll run this way to the road, and then it goes across the road, and it keeps going across my property.
So that's like a main line,
That's
a
okay.
feeder line.
Yep.
And where do you get gas into your,
I don't use
you don't use the gas?
Nope.
Okay. So if you went east of the shed, what problems would that present?
The only thing is you got the gas line that runs here, and then
And that's our tillable land for the,
feedlot, and then I got, and then I'm in the field which I would like to keep.
Where was that electrical line again?
Electrical line runs along the ditch.
In the road right away.
Yep.
So, question for staff, with those gas lines and that, are there any setbacks that they have to abide with those?
Madam Chair, Member Sherping, if there's an easement on the property, they need to either have that easement vacated or they have to avoid it. It's, from what I can tell, I didn't find the easement in my search. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but that easement is owned by the company that owns the gas line, in my understanding of those. So they would have to work something out with the gas company if they wanted to build over that easement. I don't know about setbacks. I think they just have to avoid the easement. That's generally how a private easement would work from what we can tell. It's nothing that, like I said, it's nothing that I could find from our records, but that was the agreement between the two private parties.
And I'll just make a comment about those gas lines because we have one that runs through our property, so we're real familiar with it. You can't build, dig anything close to those lines because they're set to trigger in their main offices when there's vibration, or even vehicles driving over it can cause it to kick off the alarms in the main office for those gas lines. We're told on the farm that we're not supposed to be within 500 feet, of that's not realistic because it runs through the middle of our field. But, anytime we're doing anything major, we have to call in and tell them we're doing it so that the alarms don't go off. So they're pretty particular about getting too close to those gas lines.
Madam Chair?
Go ahead.
Just a comment, after visiting the site, and you can see on the map up here, it doesn't show the terrain differences that are there. This is a very hilly site. In fact, I'm kind of impressed with the way the driveways are set up. I came in from the bottom road on the top over there and didn't even see anything until I got to the crest of the hill as you go up into it. And as you come around this way, it drops off where you don't even see the top of the barn sheds or even where the feedlot is. So I looked at that site and I talked with the applicant about where, and I think the thoughtful situations, that's the only place if you're going to do it is where you're going to be able to place it. Now the issue is now, do you look at what the size of the structure or what it is? I did see that the trailer home, and trailer homes are naturally viewed as temporary, and I think you got good use out of this. And while I was there, I think he had just pulled the straw bales away from the bottom of the house. We had a nice day for once, but so I look at that and access to it and what it would do to the property. I don't think, looking up at the field, again, you see the elevation changes going up there, putting it up there, you've got the road set off going over there, you've got a gas line. I have no idea what that easement is or the difficulty is to go through. And then you look at where that'd be a new septic system, that'd be a new well, everything going up in that area. So if we look at this, there isn't a lot of opportunity for a spot besides where that trailer home is. And as I saw, it was staked out. You're going to remove some trees out of there, but you are within that, or in excess of the 100-foot setback and everything on there. And the only issue is that other dwelling. So that's my comments after the site visit.
Thank you. I'm looking at this alternative number 3, where the one part that feels like we don't fit at this time is that the current older home needs to be at least 80 years old and it's 73 years old. Like, And then there's the 15 years later, it needs to be removed or converted. And understanding the applicant saying that his sister is early 60s, so in 15 years, if she lives to be 85, it's close to that. I'm wondering if maybe the variance, this is just me thinking out loud, because the difference between 80 and 73 years is 7 years, and there's that 15-year provisional use, would it be possible to have 15 plus 7? So then the home is still gets to that 80 years, and then it has to be removed in 15 years after that, but it gives us that 7-year, that's the variance, is that 7-year difference between 73 and 80-year-old home.
Madam Chair, I want to chime in a little bit. That would require a separate request.
Okay.
That would need to be renoticed if we were to do anything aside from what's being requested.
Okay.
Just so that you understand that. I mean, that yes, that's it's stated in that option that a variance would be needed to go down that road. But just know that that's not something we can grant tonight at this meeting.
Madam Chair, just a point of clarification. So you're saying that you would holding for 7 years till the house is 80, then begin the 15-year process? So that would be 23 years out. Is that what you meant? Okay.
Yep,
All right.
or 22, yep, but yes, because that would at
Or
least
22,
take
great, yep.
into account the younger age of the home and still kind of give the current occupant a decent chance at staying where she likes.
Okay, thank you.
So, Madam Chair, just a question for staff. So, for clarity, if we were to go with the recommended condition number 3 as is, do we need to renotice, or can we just go with it as is?
Madam Chair, Member Wienerman, option 3 was an alternative. It would need to be renoticed.
Okay.
Because it is a different part of the ordinance. It's a different request. It would not be requesting to leave things as they are with a new dwelling. It would be a different request.
So then, in light of that, do we have any time issues? Like 60-day notice or anything like that? Are we?
No, we're not up against any. It would come down to when they want to get their permit.
Okay, thank you.
It's on the applicant's timeline at this point. It's a matter of when they get their permit. So, yeah, from our perspective at the department, we don't have them up against any deadlines for making a change to what they have now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. To me, like the variance as it's requested right now, it sounds like the concern is that if you have 2 livable homes that are less than 200 feet away, you can't easily split the property into 2 parcels. And that's one that I'm having a hard time finding an argument for. But if the thing that we're trying to do a variance on is 73 versus 80 years, that I personally feel more comfortable making a variance towards that. But that's just my thoughts right now.
So, Madam Chair, I'm liking what you're proposing, and just to be clear, that would get rid of the old structure after some period of time, and there only be one dwelling on there, correct?
Mm-hmm. Might be less of a headache.
Yeah. I'm liking that.
But you'd make them go through the whole process again.
Yeah.
Yes, it'd still be a request because the existing dwelling that would be converted to the temporary is not 80 years old as is required by ordinance. And then the conversation about extending that would also be a request of changing that standard.
Let's just get a little feedback from applicants. I mean, what are your guys' thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I've got a question here. Looking at the ordinances, I says the detached accessory dwelling unit shall be located at least 10 feet from the principal residential dwelling on the lot. And then you go down to L, that in agricultural and transitional districts, the detached accessory dwelling unit must meet requirements of section 7.33 and must be located within 150 feet of the principal single family dwelling. So my understanding, it's got to be within 10 to 150 feet away. I mean, am I understanding this incorrectly?
Madam Chair, some clarification for the applicant. That is for a structure that does not exceed 1,000 square feet, which is alternative 4. So that was an option that was provided, was to construct less than 1,000 square feet, and that's including attached garage. But that would have to meet that at least 10 feet from the existing dwelling, but not to exceed 150 feet from that dwelling. So that has the constraint of being under that 1,000 square feet.
So a process question for the staff. So it sounds like I don't want to speak for the board, but there might be interest in moving forward on number 3. Would we continue, how do we do that? So the applicant then do they have to reapply? Can they modify the existing?
So, Madam Chair, Member Wienerman, the process that I'm being clarified on is we could do a continuation and then renotice with a change in request, which would not force a decision tonight and allow them to come back. I believe we can make it the next month. We would still have time to notice for next month's meeting, which would be May 15th, I believe. Does that sound right?
Can't be that high.
Yep.
May 9th.
Is it May 9th? Thank you. Sorry about that.
How do you guys feel about that? I mean, we're trying to make the best scenario here for you with the less of a headache.
Yeah. For me, like you were saying, use the 7 years and the 15 would be nice, because that way, if it all depends how long she lives, she can live there as long as she wants. But then I know, was it you that had the question on the map why I didn't want to build next to that shed? Well, I have to stay 100 feet away from the road, and I have the pipeline, and I have the shed. So I got a hole probably this big that I have to build on. It just, everything gets so tight.
And after hearing the discussion here and Jill's proposal, I'm good with that. That solves the problem long term. There's a lot. I mean, there's a number of years, but it puts the property in compliance, and to me, that's where we need to go.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question for staff. If we went with the currently requested proposal with a condition that the home would have to be vacated after either the death or the person leaving that's currently living there, that would serve the same purpose and not bring us having to come back here again, and not, putting them a month out from, beginning their process. That when the current resident either vacated or, passed away or vacated, would, that could no longer be used as a residence.
Madam Chair, Member Mossman, if that's the route that the board wishes to go, I would suggest that we maintain the temporary dwelling unit standard of the $2,000 financial guarantee held in escrow
Mm-hmm.
for the removal of that, as we do often with mitigation or with conditions, is that we hold money in escrow. We have a figure in ordinance of $2,000 held in escrow, and I would say that even if we continued to next month, that $2,000 would be part of it. But that would, I mean, I think essentially that's doing the same thing without procedurally asking for a different variance.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and just so that the applicants kind of understand what that $2,000 is that set aside so that when it comes to having to remove that home, that there's money set aside to do it. It's still your money, but it's just set aside to be a secured amount.
Yeah, once the dwelling is gone, you get the money back.
So, Bonnie, the question I have on that is I can just imagine the wiggle room that would happen if the resident leaves. Well, what if, a niece moves in with her, and then that's a resident too? Do we have to state specifically the person's name? What happens if they change their name and get married or something like that? Like, I feel like there's a lot of wiggle room that could happen that might negate that. Or I don't know if I feel comfortable saying that after John S. Smith passes away, then you can tear down, or you must tear down the house. It feels weird to put a person-specific name or the condition of their life in the property.
I know we've done it before.
Oh, have we?
That's not
Okay.
uncommon,
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yep. As arbitrary as, even in these standards that we're working with, stating that if the resident of that dwelling no longer helps on the farm, then that use is discontinued and that needs to be removed. So it's in the ordinance that we allow for things more arbitrary than the death of a family member.
Okay.
So if we go that route, do we have to renotice or can we just add that?
That would be a condition of the decision.
I feel, though, if we're going to be going over the findings of fact, where the findings of fact, the first couple questions are specific to this ordinance, I have a harder time, and maybe other people can figure it out, but I have a harder time making good arguments to say yes on the findings of fact based off of this current variance. Unless somebody smarter than me can figure out how to word it properly that includes all the stuff that Bonnie had that will I just have more comfort just my own self of that 7 years difference versus have to be able to split the property in two difference.
And I would say my concern about changing it and adding the 7 years on, back when that was discussed, those minutes in the planning commission, I was on one of the boards when that discussions happened, so I kind of know some of the history of that. I think the idea of that was to avoid having, at least my point of view, was to avoid having a pretty new house, and then they built another pretty new house. And so then we had two homes that were quite young, and were going to be there for 50, 60 years because they were young. And I think that's why we came up with the 80-year age to the home. So I think, backing off on that, I would hate for that to, then others see that and say, oh, okay, my house is only 50 years old, so I'll go in and ask for 30 years plus the 15. I don't, and we never set precedent, but I think sometimes the public looks at what we do as if we're setting precedent.
So it sounds like we could, a couple options here are we could obviously do it as stated, no other changes. We could do it as stated with Bonnie's suggested change of that if the current occupant ends up leaving that home, it will need to be no longer marked as someplace somebody could live. And then, so that's one. So then, or the third option is tabling it and just doing renoticing for the third alternative. Does that sound right for what people understand.
Madam Chair, I would correct your second option just a little bit to say that we would continue as requested and then condition, if approved, condition with the options that have been provided by Member Mossman.
Okay, thank you.
As a, not to continue to make the decision based on the conditions, but to make a decision and then add those conditions.
Okay. I'm open to hearing what people feel on those three options.
And we maybe should discuss if we add a condition about do we want to word it as that home needs to be removed, or that it needs to be no longer used as a residence, that the building could be used for some other use on the farm as storage or...
What was your intention with the house after your sister no longer lived there?
There needs to be some structure there because that's where the well is at. But it's not planned on being used as a residential. No big, yeah.
So if we go with the condition that Bonnie outlined, that obviously will impact my answers to this. So I have, because I have to keep that in mind. I mean, for example, number 2 says the variance would be in harmony with the general purposes. Well, my answer was going to be no on that because you're not maintaining 200 feet. But if we put in that condition that we're upon death or leaving, then I'll find a way to say yes to that. Is it in general harmony? Sure, it is, because we're getting to a destination that I think is good.
My thought on that, George, is applying it to shoreland. You don't make the decision based on the mitigation that you're going to put at the end of it.
That's why I brought that up.
Exactly.
That's why I brought it up. It's going to impact how we decide.
And I think to that point too, like, oh, we have to notice it and it takes longer. But if we do decide to notice it, it gives the public a fair chance to know exactly what we're doing.
So it could, question for staff. So we could still notice it, and we could, if we're talking about the option that Bonnie talks about, we can notice it with that. They could come in with that request.
Bonnie's option is tonight's request with a condition that would manage in the future how that structure is taken care of. Renoticing would change the type or the ordinance section that we are looking at. So this would be on today, Bonnie's condition, versus doing a new section of the ordinance related to time associated with that existing structure. If you have a condition that it's removed, then the time doesn't play into it. You're just saying upon that person no longer occupying that structure.
And I believe if we would want to reissue the same request with those options, wouldn't we have to deny the request tonight and then have it reissued? And if we do that, they can't make this exact same request within a certain period of time. Am I correct?
Well, you couldn't make the same request if it was denied within a certain period of time, right?
They can withdraw this one.
It could be withdrawn. You could act on it, or you could say that you'd like to renotice for a different request, but probably need to deal with the request in front of you, yeah, in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and
withdraw and renotice, or
Continue.
Yeah.
And that was my point, was that we don't want to vote on this and deny it, because then they can't come back for a period of time and ask for the same request.
Right, but a different section of the ordinance would not be the same request.
Okay.
So when we're talking about the conditions under the staff, under that we will make a decision based upon. So the 7 questions are going to be working through. What we've taken in public testimony is also part of the findings of fact. So we have an applicant who has provided a finding of fact that the intention is for them to vacate, is for them to no longer use the house once it's vacated by the current resident. So that is a finding of fact upon which we can base our decision. They have provided that testimony to us that allows us to use that as part of our determination protocol.
Yes, that's correct. You could do that. Make sure you state those things.
So, Madam Chair, on that response, then you're looking at number 3 and just adding the condition? Is that correct?
No, so with that response, it sounds like it'd be tonight, we would do the variance as it's in front of us, including that statement as a finding of fact to help with our answering of the questions on the finding of fact. Does that sound right, Jason?
Yep, so we would act on the
the
application as is.
Okay.
They've provided evidence that they intend to vacate and no longer use the residence as a living structure upon the leaving of the person in the house currently. So I believe, based upon that, we can use number 1 with Bonnie's condition. So they've provided evidence that allows us to determine if it meets the variance, which we can discuss when we're having the discussion, and then formalize that with your condition.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. So you're looking at number 2. Question number 2 is your response on how we would view question number 2.
When we get to that, so just so we're staying clean, I don't want to prejudge any answer.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, let me just ask the applicants again. Are you in agreement with that? When your sister vacates, it'll no longer be used for...
I can use it as a storage shed or whatever,
Right.
but I can't have anybody else living.
No inhabitants.
That'll be just fine. Like she said, it's nice to leave it there because I got the well there.
Right.
And the well runs through multiple buildings.
Yep.
Is it something you could tear down and put a well house over down the road? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is the well like most old houses down the basement, or?
Yep.
Yeah.
Probably got old cesarean too.
No. Okay. Is there anyone in the audience who wishing to speak to this request? Is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak to this request? Is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak to this request? Hearing none, I'm open for a movement to close the public hearing.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion to close the
All right,
hearing.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I will second that.
All right, and we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The public hearing is now closed. Moving to the findings of fact, or are we moving to continue? Do we have any strong feelings to continue instead of the findings of fact?
I'm on board with Jason's idea.
Anybody on this side, strong feelings? Okay. All right, so then number 1. So the variance requested is to construct a 42-foot by 70-foot residential dwelling 69 feet from an existing dwelling as a secondary single-family residential dwelling unit accessory to an agricultural operation. Number 1, the proposed use is allowed in the zoning districts in which the subject property is located, yes or no?
Madam Chair, yeah, I say yes. Under the comprehensive plan, living goals, workforce housing, number 2.
Okay, I have a yes from George. I'd like to also add that it is an ag zone where the use is to live in a residential home, which is allowed in that zoning district. So that's a yes from George. Dan?
Yes.
Bonnie?
Yes.
Jason?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Number 2, the variance will be in harmony with the general purposes and intent of the official controls or any related ordinances, yes or no?
Madam Chair, I'll take a swing at this one. Based upon the testimony provided by the applicant in the public comment, I believe the findings of fact do with their intention of vacating the house upon the wishes of the current resident, and then converting the house to a non-living situation, the intent of the variance will be met to be in harmony with the purposes.
Okay, we have a yes from Jason. Dan?
Yes.
Bonnie?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
George?
Yes.
And I'm going to be yes also with the intention of this ordinance is that it will protect the property from not being split in a strange way. And looking at the placing of all the buildings of the current property, I think it would be difficult to split it in two anyways. So I think yes, it is in harmony. Number 3, the variance will be consistent with the comprehensive plan, yes or no?
Madam Chair, I'm going to say yes to that. Under living goals, number 3, support housing options.
Okay, I have a yes from Amy. Dan?
Yes.
Bonnie?
I'm going to say yes and also add in the agricultural goals, number 3, to retain areas of highly valued agricultural land because the placement of the home is protecting farmland area.
Okay, thank you. We got a yes from Bonnie. Jason?
Madam Chair, yes, in concurrence with both items.
Okay, Rob?
Yes.
George? Yes. And I'm also yes, and I also want to say that it goes under agricultural goals number 4, to strive for and support higher farm profitability and family farm stability. And number 1 and 2, because it sounded like they have animal agriculture on this property. So ag use number 2 is to emphasize the importance of animal agriculture to the county economy, which argues against putting the home in a different location. And also number 1, where the primary land use in agricultural areas should be agriculturally oriented. So a yes for number 3. Number 4, the property owner proposes to use the property in a reasonable manner, yes or no?
Madam Chair, I'm going to say yes, it is reasonable to want a new home to replace a drafty trailer.
Okay, we have a yes from Amy. Dan?
Yes.
Bonnie?
Yes.
Jason?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
George?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Number 5, the plight of the landowner is due to circumstances unique to the property, not created by the landowner, yes or no?
I'm going to say yes. We've got quite a few factors in place here. We've got a gas line, we've got an electrical line, we've got other buildings which prohibit the putting it in other places. Plus, the topography of the area really limits where you can place the home.
And I'd like to add on to Bonnie's too. We've got an easement that's involved in there, which we don't know. And there's also a well that services more than one home. So it goes to a barn and another house.
Okay, so I have a yes from Bonnie and a yes from Amy. Dan?
Yes, and I'd also like to add, moving it to the restriction or the set off you have would cause you quite a walk from the residence over to where the cattle are, and that generally that's not a good condition in Minnesota, especially in the winter. So I'm a firm yes.
I think I'm going to add a little bit more to that. Keeping in mind too, they are trying to meet that setback at the feedlot and all that as well. So this would help with that.
Okay. Jason?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
George?
Yes.
And I'm also a yes. Number 6, the variance, if granted, maintains the essential character of the locality. Yes or no?
Madam Chair, it's not going to change anything. There's a home there already.
Okay, we have a yes from Rob. Dan?
Yes, same answer.
Bonnie?
Yes.
Jason?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
George?
Yes.
And I'm also a yes. Number 7, the need for the variance involves more than economic considerations. Yes or no? I'm going to say yes, it is more than economic considerations. We have a longtime family member. They want to continue living in the home that they are living in. And we have, farm families come in many sizes and shapes. And it really is to help keep the people together in a way that works best for them and for the land. So I'm going to say it involves more than economic considerations. Dan?
Yes, and this is a century farm, and that's important to understand in Stearns County, how many people aren't willing to hang on to these. I'd like to see, the bicentennial sign go up someday too, so I'm a yes.
Okay. Bonnie?
Yes.
Jason?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
George?
Yes.
Okay, so that's a yes for number 7. All answers in the affirmative. I'm looking for a motion, and I'm kind of pointedly looking over at either Jason or Bonnie.
I'll make a motion to approve the request as made with the condition that when the current resident of the farmhouse is no longer living in that residence, that it no longer be allowed to be used as a living residential structure.
In number 3, it says it would have to be removed or converted into an accessory structure not for human habitation. I kind of like that word.
And I would accept that wording.
Because they could go into a well house.
Okay, so I have a motion from Bonnie. Do I hear a second?
Second.
And a second from Jason. We'll do a roll call. Dan?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
George?
Yes.
I'm also a yes. So it has passed. Thank you very much. You can speak with staff during normal business hours if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Yep. Okay, so then the next item is the meeting minutes from the March 14th, 2024 meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the March meeting.
Okay, I have a motion from Amy. Looking for a second.
Madam Chair, I'll second that.
Okay, a second from Dan. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so those are approved.
I do have something I want to bring up to staff. When they're filling these applications out, why aren't these things added in there, like, again, tile lines, buried lines, where the wells all are? I mean, these things are crucial for us to make decisions on.
We have very lengthy conversations with applicants, and we try to get as much out of them as we can. All of the recommendations that were in the packet were provided to the applicant. Conversations about the property. I don't know if they understand what they're coming into at the meeting, and we try to explain that.
I mean, there should be an easy way for us to inform them. Please draw a green line where your well is. Draw a red line if, I mean, they all get a map.
Right.
But is it our responsibility to know where that stuff
But
is?
we need to know those things in order to make those
But if
decisions.
they don't feel it's important enough to tell us where they are.
I mean, you can't just go in there ripping up all this stuff.
No, but it's their
But
responsibility to convince us they can
Right,
do it.
it's their responsibility to let us know, but our applicant form should give them that direction to put it on there.
Yeah.
Lines, water lines, yeah.
I mean, these farms nowadays have so many different things that are running through them. You know, people are burying power lines. You know, there's tile lines, there's gas lines, God knows what else there is. And they should be noted on those applications.
But one thing to note though is there's a lot of people that buy property
I
that
don't know.
there are gas lines that run through their property, And they never read their abstract,
Right.
and they don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, no, well, that's a family farm. He's growing up there.
Yeah.
But wouldn't this be a way for them to start checking it then if they have to mark this off on an application form?
Well, I did ask, why that wasn't part of the packet, and he said, oh, I forgot about it. Until all of a sudden I was looking over, there's a gas line that runs over there.
Yeah,
So it wasn't top of mind for him because I'm sure he sees it all the time going forward. And then I asked, well, do you have an easement? I have no idea. I just know it's there, and that's all. Yeah. So.
But I mean, if you would have had that question on the application,
I
it probably
agree,
would have prompted him to, okay, yep,
but-
here it is.
Yeah. So, but. Anyway, I think it was an evolution of thought on him because I talked about that space over there. He said, oh, because I looked over there and I could see the orange sign over there. So that's a gas line. I said, well, where does that run? And then he said, well, I think it goes over to the barn and then cuts around the house. And I said, well, that's important to know because you probably couldn't build over at that site. So it's
A lot of times too, a lot of these houses and barns, there could be separate wells on these properties.
there's existing and abandoned utilities that these people, especially the abandoned ones, they don't know about. It's tough. So it's.
I think if we're going to have that question, staff should be careful to word it in such a way that are you aware of any easements as opposed to are there any easements?
Yeah.
Because we
Right.
don't want somebody accidentally
Yep.
misrepresenting something if we,
Or the
we could,
question could be the same as, are you aware of any?
And generally
line.
in the
I just
construction.
want to make sure nobody
Yeah.
backs into a,
And in the construction side, when I was getting permits, the question is, are you aware of any existing or abandoned utilities at that point?
And I think that's a great question to be asking. Or
Especially, well, in the farm, it's a little bit different than city construction, but you always find something. All of a sudden, you find a subway tunnel. It's
Yeah, and by wording it that way, then it puts the responsibility on the applicant and not back on staff.
and they can do their research. Yeah.
Then it's their responsibility to find out and,
if I was filling that form out, I would guarantee you would know where everything is on that property.
yeah.
So,
But then because we've worked with it, we're aware that that stuff matters.
yeah, especially when you're spending thousands of dollars.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, that they don't know what matters. They just don't realize that it's a question. But I think just posing it, if you're aware of any existing or abandoned, make sure because they'll say, what do you mean abandoned? Well, then you go back over there and you can check and see what else has been there. At least you're aware of it. Otherwise, it would fall on the contractor's responsibility. But I think it's a good question.
Okay. Agenda item number 3, the next meeting is May 9th, 2024. Are there any other items we need to be made aware of?
One.
Okay.
Oh, I know. I kind of like this one and done thing.
Bring your dinner.
Then I'm open for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll move.
Okay,
To
we got a
adjourn.
motion from Bonnie. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
We got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.